Hey, Kyle here with WinTheHouseYouLove.com. In this video, we're going to cover how a purchase contract works. So I know shopping for a home is really exciting. You might be on Zillow or another site, and maybe you're going to showings, and it's really exciting to look for homes. But when you find a house that you love and you want to purchase it, how do you do that? You do that by submitting an offer, and that's also known as a purchase contract, where basically you say to the seller, hey, we want to buy your home, and these are the terms that we want to use to buy your home. So your purchase contract is going to detail everything about the purchase price that you want, if you want seller credits, if you're getting a home inspection. It also adds a lot of protection for you in case there's a problem with the home or the appraisal comes in short. It gives you all of these different exits to be able to get out of a deal if you need to, and it makes sure that the seller is going to follow through with that deal. So I want to show you an example purchase contract. Purchase contracts are going to be different in every area that you're looking to buy. So this probably is not going to look exactly like your purchase contract, but it's going to be extremely similar with a lot of the different sections in this purchase contract. So we're going to go walk through this line by line. There's also going to be a scroll bar along the bottom where you can find different sections if you'd like to. Now, just a quick note before we dive into this, I'm not a real estate agent and I'm not an attorney. I'm a loan officer. My team works in all 50 states. If you'd like to work with us to get a pre-qualification, you can go to WinTheHouseYouLove.com. Okay, so with this contract, I'll have a link to it in the description if you want to follow along, but we're going to use these line numbers here on the left to keep track. So first, just the basics is your contract's going to show what home are you purchasing? What's the legal address? It may also include a description or the parcel number of the property that you're buying or the home that you're buying. And this is really helpful in saying what exactly are you looking to purchase? What is the actual legal address that you can then look up on the county site if you need more information? What's interesting too about the parcel numbers is making sure that you're getting all the land that you expect to, because you may look at a home and it looks like one property, but that may include several parcels. So that's something to keep in mind. There may be one parcel that the home is on and then an additional parcel that is just land, and maybe that's being conveyed with the property. That's something you want to talk to your real estate agent about. Okay. Second, really big factor that most people are focused on is what is the price in terms. Okay. So what is the purchase price here? So if we were filling in this contract, let's just say our address is 123 Main Street. And of course you'd fill in a city and state and county and the whole deal. We're not going to do that whole thing because this is not a real contract that we're doing. Next would be the price in terms. So let's say we're buying this home for $300,000. Okay. So that would go right here. Now, most people kind of think that's the end. They see these first two lines and then they forget that this contract goes on and on. And we're not going to cover every single thing line by line, but I want to pinpoint the highlights that you need to know about your purchase contract that are really going to make up the deal of you buying this home. Because the rest of this contract can change how much money you're bringing to closing, how quickly you have to close. And what a lot of people forget is that this contract is binding to both you and the seller. So if you don't perform to the terms of the contract, if you don't follow the contract, the seller could have the legal right to cancel the deal. Same thing with the seller. The seller has to follow the contract. If they don't, then you have legal right, most likely, to cancel the deal. Okay. And so often what can happen is people don't follow a contract. The seller has wiggle room to get out of it if they want to. Maybe they got a higher offer somewhere and they're able to take that deal. So understanding your contract, make sure that you can follow it and that the deal is going to go through just as you expected it. Okay. So the next thing that we want to look at is earnest money. This can be called different things in different states. Some people refer to this as a good faith deposit. Around us, it's called earnest money. Some people call this an escrow deposit. It means the same thing. And basically, what it is it's kind of like you're putting skin in the game to say, I'm going to put money up front on this contract. And if I don't follow through with this contract, then I could potentially forfeit that money. Okay. Now, this is going to be different depending on the market that you're in. But let's say that we're buying a $300,000 house, and what would be fairly typical would be about 1% in earnest money. So what we might say is we're going to do $3,000 up front. Okay. And what's going to happen is this is submitted for deposit with the listing realtor or seller. Okay, so this is held by another person. All right. Now, this money, if we legally cancel this deal, that's money that we get back. Okay. If the deal goes through and we close, that money is contributed to part of your down payment. Okay. So this isn't an additional fee. Basically, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, seller, I promise that I'm going to do my best to uphold this contract. And if I don't, I'm so confident that I'm going to do that. I'm putting money up. I'm risking this money and potentially not getting it back if I don't follow through. Otherwise, the reason why earnest money exists is because if it didn't, then it'd be really easy to just go put a bunch of contracts on a bunch of different homes, and a seller doesn't have any faith that you're going to follow through with the deal. That's why earnest money exists. In competitive markets, you may need more. In less competitive markets, you might not need any. I've seen markets, and I've worked with realtors who never put any earnest money on contracts, or they don't advise their buyers to. And that, if that works, that's perfectly acceptable. Okay. Now, earnest money kind of has a lot of questions around it. What happens to the money? What if we don't have an agreement? And please read your contract. Every contract is going to be different in different areas. In some places, the buyer gets their earnest money back. In some places, the seller gets to keep the earnest money. It really all depends on what's happening, and you need to read your contract to understand this. So with this specific contract, let's just read through very quickly and I'll help interpret this. So we have an earnest money contingency. It says the contract is contingent upon the buyer providing earnest money in the amount of, let's say, $3,000. The earnest money shall be submitted for deposit with, and in here, it'd be who that's being held with. Okay, so it's very typical that it's held with one of the real estate brokerages. All right. Here's another thing. A written acknowledgement of earnest money shall be provided to the listing realtor within X days. Often, this is around 3 calendar days. Here's one point where the contract might not be followed. Okay, so keep in mind here, if let's say you went under contract and a written acknowledgement wasn't sent to the listing agent within that 3-day period, then the seller could potentially back out of the deal and your earnest money could be in jeopardy. Already, we're just 14 lines in, and you can see there's already an opportunity where this contract could not be followed potentially, and that could put your earnest money at stake. Okay, so it's something to keep in mind when you are looking through your contract and you submit an offer, making sure that these terms are favorable for you. Okay, all right, so let's continue reading through here. Let's see. If written acknowledgement of earnest money is not provided, the seller anytime after the stated period may, by written notice to selling realtor or buyer, terminate this contract. Okay, that's what we just talked about here. If the contract terminates for any reason, the earnest money will not be dispersed to any party. All right, so this contract in Ohio is a little bit strange in that what ends up happening is if there's a dispute with the earnest money, it actually has to be held in a trust account for 2 years, unless the buyer or seller goes to court, gets a court order for who gets money dispersed. Okay, so basically, if there's a dispute where, let's say, the seller is not willing to give the earnest money back, even though it met the terms of this contract, the buyer would then have to go to a court to get that money awarded to them. Or if not, it's going to sit in an account for 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, it's given back to the buyer. Okay, so I know it can be confusing, a little overwhelming, but it's really helpful. You really need to read through your contract and make sure you're aware of what's going to happen in different circumstances with your contract. That way, if something happens, you're not shocked by it. Okay, really, that's what you need to, I feel like, be comfortable with your contracts, is making sure that you understand what are the different circumstances and what happens here. So many people will just go and put, I've seen people put $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in earnest money, but they're not even aware of what happens to the earnest money, what rights they have with the earnest money, and it puts them in a rough situation in the future if they need to cancel a contract. Okay, so right here, this is just explaining even more detail about this whole escrow agreement with earnest money. Now, then what I want to get down to is what are called seller credits. And seller credits are where you negotiate for the seller to pay a portion of your closing costs. So usually it's a percentage of the purchase price that are contributed towards your closing costs. And this is a really big part of a contract, especially for first-time homebuyers who need some assistance with the money that they're bringing to closing. Okay. So on this contract, it starts in line 40. And this is talking about the seller agreeing to pay actual settlement charges or fees due at closing on behalf of the buyer. This is including, but not limited to, discount points, closing costs, prepaids, and other fees allowed by the buyer's lender in an amount not to exceed. And let's say we're going to do 2% of the purchase price. So this would be $6,000. Okay. For most people, this is probably going to cover a good portion of closing costs, if not all of the closing costs, leaving you with just the down payment. So right here, you can see there's a lot of structure going on in this purchase contract just from this first page. We already defined what's legally being conveyed with the property by the parcel number, the purchase price that we're buying this home at, the earnest money that we're putting down, what happens with our earnest money, and then also if we're getting any credits from the seller to go towards our closing costs. Okay. So then I want to move down to financing type. This is also where your offer has an option to be more or less competitive. And this is based on the type of financing that you're intending on using. So first, you do have to notify the seller if you're choosing this is your primary home or a rental. The seller, if they want to, I know some people have done this. They don't want to sell to people who are just investors, and that's perfectly within their right to do. Also, this is showing them, are you paying in cash? Are you doing or what type of loan are you using? Really, the most favorable for a seller tends to be cash and conventional loans. And then the next favorable would be FHA, USDA, or VA loans. And these are mainly because these have different inspection requirements and appraisal requirements that may be more difficult for a deal to go through with an FHA, USDA, or VA loan. So sellers tend to like cash and conventional loans better. All right, so now we get down to the financing time frame here. And this is another important part where you need to keep this in mind with your contract. That way you're following it to a T. And this is just saying if the buyer fails to provide written confirmation to the seller that the buyer has completed any of the requirements of the financing time frame set below, then the seller may terminate the contract. Okay. These are options where the seller can back out of the deal if they want to, and you don't want them to have the ability to back out of the deal if you want to continue moving forward with the contract. Okay. So right here, it's going to show when a pre-qualification letter has to be given to the seller from your lender if you are using financing. It also is going to show that you need to complete a loan application with an intent to proceed with a lender. And this is basically where you tell a lender, hey, we want to work with you. We're ready to move forward. And you need to notify the seller with payment of the appraisal within a certain days. So this can really change, but I've seen this typically around the 10-day mark. It could be shorter, it could be a little bit later, but somewhere around there is pretty average for a purchase contract. Basically, what this is saying here is it's helping the seller know that while you're going through the purchase contract, that you're not just kind of dragging your feet. They actually selected a lender, you told them you want to work with them, you filled out a loan application, and you paid for the appraisal to get everything rolling. Otherwise, it could be seen as you delaying the contract, which the seller obviously doesn't want. Okay. Also in here, this is saying that the buyer or the buyer's lender shall provide written notification to the seller that a conditional approval has been obtained. Okay. This is usually going to be within 14 to 20 days. Usually I see agents write things a little bit longer than shorter. That way they don't run into any issues with the contract deadlines here. Okay. And then also the final stage of loan approval, that the loan is clear to close, needs to be obtained. This is usually for as long as the contract is. So usually around the date of closing, if not shortly before that period. So this usually ends up being around 25 to 30 days. So I often see that around 30. Now, what's interesting about the financing contingency and time frame in here is that all of this in here really is serving to protect you. So let's say that you look to purchase a home. We put $3,000 in earnest money. We already gave that to the listing agent to be held in their brokerage. So that's held until closing happens. Now, let's say that we look to get a loan and for whatever reason, you're not able to get qualified for a loan. Well, this adds protection for you to be able to get your earnest money back in that event. Okay, so this is protection for you and the seller to make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to do But if financing falls through, if you're not able to get financing for a mortgage, then you can get your earnest money back. Now, another huge protection for you is the appraisal contingency. And a lot of people have a ton of confusion around how an appraisal contingency works. So when you buy a home with a mortgage, the lender is going to require an appraisal, unless there is an appraisal waiver from the lender saying an appraisal isn't required. That's very rare, not super common. Your lender will tell you about it if it happens. But for most people, a mortgage lender is going to require an appraisal. And an appraisal just helps the lender make sure that if you're buying a $300,000 home, that it's actually worth $300,000. They're not going to let you buy a $300,000 home if the home is only worth $100,000. They need to make sure that their investment, the mortgage they're giving to you, isn't super risky by you buying a home that's worth less than what you paid for it. So the appraisal contingency is saying that the buyer's obligation to close, so your need to close, is based on the real estate appraising at or above the final sales price of the home. Okay. Now, if the real estate does not obtain an appraised value equal or greater to, so if the home appraises lower than what we purchased it for, you, the buyer, have the right to terminate this contract by letting the seller know within X period of days. So this may be, let's say, 20 days, okay? Because this would have to happen after the appraisal. So this is a huge protection for you because, again, let's say you bought the home, or we're offering to buy the home for $300,000, and we get an appraisal on the home, and it comes in at $250,000. Okay, you don't get to buy it for $250,000 if you waive the appraisal contingency. So in that event, you agree to pay $300,000 for it. The lender will only give you that loan up to $250,000, okay, minus the down payment. So you're then on the hook for coming up with $50,000. That's where the appraisal contingency protects you. If the home appraises lower than what you agreed to buy it for, then at any time you can say, you know what, we're not going to go through with this anymore. The home is worth way less than we thought it was. So either we're going to renegotiate this contract and change the purchase price, or we're going to back out of this deal. Okay. Now, some people, this happened maybe about more common about a year ago, when the market was even more competitive than it is now, where people were doing appraisal contingency waivers, where they were basically saying, hey, all this, we don't care. If it comes in short, we'll pay the difference. This is a really risky place to be unless you have a ton of cash on hand, because let's say it does come in $50,000 short, you're on the hook for that. You signed an agreement that you would pay $300,000 and it came in at $250,000. The lender's not going to give you a loan for that difference. So you need to pay the $50,000 or renegotiate with the seller. If you waive the appraisal contingency, then you're on the hook for that money. So it's something to be mindful of here. Okay. Now, 98 right here, you're also going to have a section in your contract that shows you what's actually included, right? Do you just get the walls? Do you get furniture inside? Do you get any personal property? Do you get the microwave and the refrigerator and the oven? This is showing you everything that's actually included. I'm not going to go through every single thing in here, but you can see everything that's going to be included is pretty, this is pretty extensive. And this can all be changed in the contract as well. What a lot of people are interested in is making sure that they have things like their microwave, refrigerator, dishwasher, those more common appliances that are going to be included in here. That way you don't buy the house expecting the refrigerator and then you move in and you're like, oh my gosh, we have to buy a refrigerator because it's not here anymore. Okay, so it's something to be mindful of. What is the actual property that's being included here? You can, in your contract, include personal items. I've seen people want to put like, a couch or a home stereo system. They see the seller had it and maybe it was a surround system that the seller had that was installed and like, we want that. And we don't want to buy it. It's already installed. So we will include that in here. Again, if the seller is willing to agree to that, or if there's anything that's excluded from the contract as well. So this next section is going to detail a little bit more about the property, some work that was done, the condition of the home, which we're not going to cover in this video. Again, there's so many lines in your contract and this video would be insanely long if we covered every single thing. But the next thing I want to cover with you that's important is the home warranty. So we can see that here on line 204. And this is basically saying a buyer has been informed that the home warranty or home warranty programs may be available to provide additional benefits to the buyer. And then you can choose whether you're going to purchase one or not. Often what can happen is a seller may purchase a home warranty for you. And this is just kind of just a credit that they give you. It can be an incentive for a seller to sell their home. In more competitive markets, it's not likely that that's going to happen. So you can choose to pay that on your own. You also don't have to purchase it at this time. You can also purchase it later. So this really is only if the seller is going to be paying a home warranty for you. Again, just to make it their offer more attractive. They want to sell their home quicker, where they might say, hey, we're going to offer a $400 home warranty with it as well. So that's something to keep in mind and keep it helpful. Also, property disclosure. So most contracts have a separate property disclosure form, and this is going to tell you more details about the condition of the home. However, the condition of the home in the property disclosure is only based on the seller's experience and observation of their home. So it's not a home inspection. Basically, the seller just has to go through and say what they believe about the condition of their home there. You obviously still want to have your own independent inspection, but this is showing you if you have received it or not. Okay, so now another huge part of the contract that you really want to make sure you understand is the inspection contingency. Okay, so in this contract, it says the buyer acknowledges that they have been advised by a realtor to conduct inspections of the real estate that are a concern to the buyer and have been provided the opportunity to make this contract contingent upon the results of such inspections. Please get a home inspection. Do not waive a home inspection. I know in really competitive markets, a lot of people were waiving home inspections. And the reason why is because sellers, frankly, were just getting greedy and had tons of offers, and they wanted the least amount of hassle possible. A home inspection is going to protect you so much, especially if you're not aware of all the issues that can happen with a home. A home inspection is where a third party is going to come out and give you information about the condition of the home. Everything from really minor details all the way up to bigger issues that may need to be referred to a specialist, like somebody to inspect the foundation or the structure of the home if needed. And an inspection is really important because it gives you a period of time in which you can back out of the contract if there are large issues with the home, right? So picture this, you bought a home and you move in, and then as soon as you move in, your furnace goes out, or you have other issues with the home, and that costs you thousands of dollars that you weren't prepared for or don't have the money for. An inspection, the goal of it is to help you understand what issues could lie ahead with you buying this home to make sure you don't buy a home that's just a money pit. Now, you may be buying a home that you want to fix up and you're perfectly fine with it having issues. That's fine. For most people, they want to buy a home and know that they're not going to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars as soon as they buy the home to make sure it's up to livable condition. That's what an inspection contingency does. It gives you a period of time where you can hire a third-party home inspector who can then inspect the home for you and then gives you a report. And then depending on what it says in this contract is you can then renegotiate for the seller to either make repairs, give you a credit, or you could potentially back out of the contract if the repairs are too great that you don't want to take on. Okay. So down here, this is going to give you the right to waive the inspection or to elect having an inspection. Now, if you choose to have an inspection, you can't just do it any time that you want. There is going to be a stipulation to when you have that inspection and all the things that you can negotiate with it. And you can see this is a pretty lengthy section here. All right. So right here, what we'll see, the buyer shall have a period of X calendar days for an inspection period. Often this is around 10 to 14 days is what I see as common. So what ends up happening in here is it says buyer shall have a period of, let's say, 14 calendar days, the inspection period beginning on the day following the contract acceptance, to conduct and complete any and all inspections of real estate prior to the end of the inspection period. The buyer shall either provide the seller a written request for the seller to correct any conditions or matters adversely affecting the real estate in what's called a defect notice. And the defect notice shall identify conditions to which the buyer is requesting correction by the seller. and shall include relevant portions of inspection reports which describe conditions to be corrected. The buyer agrees that minor routine maintenance and cosmetic items are not to be considered material, and buyer may not object to these in the defect notice. So option 1 is saying we have 14 days to get a home inspector out to the home, inspect the home, they're going to give us a report. Let's say they come back and they say everything looks great. Okay, let's say there's no issues at all. Maybe there's a little drip from the faucet. Okay, in that instance, if you give a defect, you can't give a defect notice to the seller and say, we want it painted this color and we want the drip fixed. Okay, those are minor routine maintenance and cosmetic items that we can't change. Now, if the inspector comes back and says, here are the problems with the furnace, this is why it's about to go out, or here are the issues with it, then you can come to the seller with the defect notice and say, here is the issue with your furnace. This either needs to be fixed and we need to see evidence that it's fixed, or maybe you request a credit for that money for the repair when you decide to move in or after the contract is up. Or provide to the seller a signed written notice of buyer's satisfaction with the quality and conditions of all aspects of real estate. Okay. Now, please keep in mind here that this section is negotiating. This is something that you do actively to negotiate in the contract. Because if your inspection report comes back, and let's say there's some issues, but maybe it's not going to cost you that much money. Maybe it's going to take you a few weekends and a trip to a hardware store to get some of the things fixed. That's going to be better for you to do on your own than to send the seller a defect notice. Because if at this period, which we'll cover here in just a minute, if the seller doesn't agree to it, then it stalls the contract, and it could get you to the point where the contract gets terminated because the seller doesn't have to agree to your demands. You're basically saying, these are the things that I want fixed, but the seller gets to counter. And if you both don't come to an agreement, then the contract may be terminated and not go through. So you don't really want to risk a home that you love over minor things. I see people do this all the time. They're like, this is my dream home. I want to move in. I can picture myself being here forever. But then they go and give the seller a list of all these tiny little things that don't really matter. It maybe costs a few $100s for them to fix, but they act like that is the thing. It has to all be fixed by you before I move in. And just know that even new homes are likely going to have issues that come up during the inspection. Homes are complex. They're exposed to the elements. There's going to be issues with a home. No home is perfect and will stay perfect for its entire duration. If you love the home, don't risk it over just tiny little things, okay? So this also says delivery of either notice in the section shall designate the end of the inspection period. In the event that the buyer shall fail to timely provide any required written notice to the seller, the buyer shall be deemed to have waived any further inspections and provided a notice of satisfaction to the seller, okay? So don't skimp on your inspection period, okay? You need to make sure that you're following this contract to protect yourself. So then it says, in the event the buyer has timely delivered to seller defect notice, the seller should have a period of up to X calendar days. Usually this is a pretty short period, around, let's say, 3 calendar days, beginning the day following the delivery of the defect notice to evaluate the buyer's request for corrections. Prior to the end of the consideration period, the seller shall either provide to the buyer a signed written agreement to correct all defects in the manner detailed and requested, or provide to the buyer a signed written counteroffer detailing the seller's agreement to correct defects identified in the defect notice. Delivery is the end of the consideration period, okay? In the event that the seller has timely delivered the buyer a written counteroffer, the party shall have up to, and again, this is usually pretty short. So 3 to 5 is pretty common here. Calendar days, the settlement period beginning on the day following the delivery, to reach a mutual signed agreement detailing the seller's correction of defects, if any. Okay, and then it goes on to say, delivery of any mutually signed, written, and accepted counteroffer for correction of defects or for no correction of defects during the settlement period shall end the settlement period. In the event that the parties fail to reach a mutual signed written agreement under this section, this contract shall automatically terminate. Okay, again, this is where I'm saying, if you really like the house, don't kill the deal over really small things. Of course, if there's structural problems and issues with the roof and there's thousands of dollars of repairs that you can't afford, absolutely don't move forward with the purchase. but don't kill a deal if it's just a couple $100 of things that you can go fix, or you can hire somebody to fix. I see people do this all the time. They want to fight with a seller. It's like this weird ego battle between people, and it's so weird. Okay, don't do it. Now, there is a section that says, provided limited circumstances in which a buyer may elect to not provide a defect notice and may terminate the contract without the opportunity for the seller to correct any items. There are only a few ways in which this can happen. This would be in the event the buyer's inspection reveals the real estate conditions were not disclosed by the seller prior to contract acceptance, and that evidence of one or more of the following conditions adversely affect the structural integrity of buildings: presence of asbestos, presence of lead-based paint, presence of any other hazardous material as defined below. Okay. And of course, you also have hazardous toxic materials that also can cancel the deal. Okay, so now let's move on to the title company. So we'll go down here to section 400. So this is showing us who is going to be the settlement agent or title company that's going to organize this together. The title company is going to do a couple different things. They're first going to do an inspection of the chain of title and give you a title report, basically showing and certifying that when you buy the property, you're going to be the sole owner. They're going to make sure there's no other issues with the title of the home, that the seller has legal claim to sell the property, and that there isn't anyone else who has ownership interest in the home. And they'll also ensure that as well. So if anyone down the line, maybe let's say there was an heir to the property and that got mixed up in closing documents, you buy the home, and then someone claims that they have ownership property in your home, then title insurance will kick in to help protect you in that event, making sure that someone else doesn't get to just have ownership access to your home. So what's going to happen is the title company is going to be selected. So this could be selected by you or the seller. Really doesn't matter. There's kind of like a common courtesy in different areas. Sometimes it's the seller, sometimes the buyer, but ultimately you can always negotiate who the title company is going to be in here. Next, this is really important, is the date of closing. A lot of people think of this as like a suggestion. It's not. This is part of the contract, the date of closing. If the date of closing is missed, that can be potential for the contract to be terminated. So date of closing shall be, you would put in a date here, or is mutually agreed by the parties. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary, in the event that the buyer and seller are proceeding in good faith performance under this contract, closing cannot occur due to occurrences or circumstances out of direct control of either party. The date of closing shall be extended for a period of up to 7 calendar days. Unless otherwise agreed, such extension shall extend the terms of possession and occupancy. Now, this is a recent change, the 7-day period here of extension. This contract used to just have a hard closing date, meaning that if that date was missed, the contract is void. It's terminated at that point. So read through your contract and make sure you understand this. And why this is important is making sure that you can't just go and kind of like ease through all of these steps in the purchase contract here. Because if you miss your closing date, then you could lose out on being able to purchase the home. The seller can pull out, go relist the home, and potentially find a better offer if they want to. So you obviously don't want that. You need to make sure that you hit this date of closing. Also, if the deal gets terminated, you could lose your earnest money, and that's something to be mindful of here as well. So that closing date is really important. It's not a suggestion. It really is something that you both agree to. This contract just happens to have this grace period of 7 days. In here, again, assuming that everyone's proceeding in good faith, but not a lot of contracts have that. It is a hard closing date. Now, for most people, they buy a home and then they close on it. So they have the date of closing. And what happens with the closing is, you paid your down payment and closing cost, money was exchanged, you signed all the paperwork, all the contract terms were satisfied. And usually what happens is you'll get keys to the home as well. You'll get occupancy. However, in some circumstances, you may not have occupancy at the same time of closing. So for instance, what can happen in several cases is you may close on the home, everything's satisfied, everything's completed, you paid the money you needed to buy the home, But you may give the seller a period of time to move out of the home. Okay. They may have a week to be able to move out of the home and into their other one. And really this, again, is all just negotiated here in the contract. So this is just saying in this section, Possession and Occupancy, that either you as the buyer are going to be given access to the home at closing. So, sign your paperwork, you get the keys, go rush over the home and do whatever you want, go run through the hallway. Or maybe you give the seller a period of time in which they're able to vacate the property. In some instances, what people have done as well is it may be a longer possession period where maybe they have a month or two, and then the seller actually rents back the home from the buyer. So you purchased it, but maybe you're giving the seller, the seller's like, we'd love to sell you the home, but we need a month after we close to be able to move out. Okay. Because they're, maybe they're moving or they have whatever else going on. And so they want that. And so you say, okay, we'll do that, but you need to pay us X amount in rent per month for a period of days. While, we own the home, but you need to rent it back from us. That's also a very common thing. If your possession period or your occupancy period is longer or, after your closing date. Okay. And then finally, we move all the way down to how this contract works. Okay. And this is the action by the seller. So everything that we covered in here was part of our offer. So again, let's back up. Let's say you were shopping for some homes, you toured a house and you fell in love with it. You want to buy this house. And so you talk with your real estate agent and you say, hey, we want to purchase this home, which by the way, if you're looking for a quality real estate agent in any city in the US, you can go to winthehouseyoulove.com/agent. We have an agent referral program. We can connect you with a great agent if you're looking for one. So let's say you talk with your agent, you say, we want to buy this house. You want to write an offer on it. So you would go work with your agent to actually fill in all of these sections of this contract. And likely your agent's going to help you through a lot of it and give you, some of these general rules of thumb of different dates, different inspection periods, appraisal periods, things like that. More common dates there. So you don't have to do all of every single line by yourself. So what you're going to do is fill out this whole contract with your real estate agent and actually submit it to the seller, or really the listing agent of the seller. Okay. So your agent will take the contracts or the offer and hand it to their agent and say, could you review this and get back to us? Okay. Now, usually what ends up happening is there's going to be a period of time for the seller to consider the offer. So that's what's happening here is you as the buyer are going to have all this created, all the terms that you want. All right. And this is where you get to make your offer be competitive. If you're in a really competitive market, maybe you're putting down more earnest money. Maybe you're shortening some of these periods, or you're offering a higher purchase price. You're not asking for seller credits. You're trying to make your offer more attractive. Or maybe you're not in a super competitive area and you're like, hey, we want closing costs and we want a lower price and we want a longer inspection period. And you're listing everything that you want. Okay. So you then give that to the seller, your agent does, and you're giving the seller the opportunity to look it over and either accept it, reject it, or give you a counter offer. Okay. So that's what's happening right here in this section. The seller, along with their agent, is going to review through the terms that you offered them, and they're either going to accept everything in here, they're going to just completely reject it, or they're going to give you a counter offer. And in a counter offer, they can modify any single thing in this contract. So maybe we submitted this at $300,000, and the seller's like, we agreed to everything, but we want this to be $305,000. So they'll submit that back to you, and then you have the opportunity to accept that or counter that if you want to. And it can go back and forth several times if needed. So that's really how the negotiation process works with this offer. You find the house, you write up the terms that you want to submit, you want to offer, that gets sent to the seller reviews it, and they either accept, reject, or give you a counter offer with their own terms. And you get to choose to accept those, reject those, or counter offer those yourself if that's something that you want to do. Ultimately, contracts, they're long, they're complex and boring, but understanding them really is going to give you a lot of confidence moving through, knowing exactly what's going to be happening as you're buying a home. And it gives you options to see if you need to back out of your contract, You have different ways that you can do that. Talk with your real estate agent about ways that you can get out of your contract legally if you need to, and make sure that you don't lose your shirt in the process of buying a home if things don't go the way that you expect them to go. Okay. We work in all 50 states. We'd love to help you with a pre-qualification on a loan. If you'd like to work with us, you can schedule a consultation call at winthehouseyoulove.com.